While he was in their synagogue, a man who was defiled by a corrupt spirit came in and began screaming, "What business have you got with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to wipe us out? I've got you figured out. You're God's special agent." But Jesus cut him down to size, saying, "Shut up and get out of him now." And the corrupt spirit did. Screaming loudly, he threw the man into a fit and then cleared out. Everyone was gobsmacked and couldn't stop talking about it. "What's going on?" they kept asking one another. "Is this some kind of new teaching? It certainly got some weight behind it. He even pulls rank on the corrupt spirits and sends them packing." And his reputation began to spread like wildfire all over the Galilean countryside. On Purple Book number 52.
I was concerned that Jesus said shut up, but you're telling him it's okay because he's talking to a demon.
Yeah. I edited one of my other things this morning. It wasn't shut up, it was something else.
Oh boy.
See? Told you.
What page?
52 in the Purple Book. And we'll just do the first 4 verses. We won't go all of that. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was homeless, you opened your door. When I was naked, you gave me your clothes. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was weary, you helped me to rest. When I was anxious, you calmed all my fears. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. When I was little, you taught me to read. When I was lonely, you gave me your love. Now enter into the home of my Father. Whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. Time for our offering.
Uh-oh.
Which other one?
The white.
White one.
Keep it right there.
Who's going to help?
There's the lifeline of the global family.
There's 3 offerings for those. This one supports the church budget. The one in the glass jar goes to Mennonite Central Committee, which does relief work all over the world. And then this one goes to, who is this, Sadie?
Global family, also MCC.
Okay,
It supports some kids and their families in India.
okay. So, do I have some other helpers this morning? Just pass it down. Oh. Mary's gonna help. Okay, I'll do this one.
Zoe will help. Zoe will help.
Oh, so, here you go.
You got a bunch of signs.
Did you?
Did you take the jar down there?
Come over here, Zoe. Come over here. Oh, you already gave it, okay, I gave it over there. Zoe, come this way. Carol, you over here. Come over here, Zoe. Go over Carol, go over there.
Okay. Hold them up. Okay, Ty. Hold it up. Oh God, to those who have hunger, give bread, and to those who have bread, give hunger for justice. Amen. Word in. Thank you.
Reading a book on your new iPad.
Yes, we are. Okay, now I need the kids. You gonna come, Rose?
Pictures.
Come on.
Okay, I hope you can all see this. I want to tell you about a lady whose name was Rosa Parks. And not just because this is the month that we look at history of people like her, but also because this week would have been her birthday on Thursday.
Wait, is she
Would
gone?
have been- She would have been 102 years old
Oh my God.
if she was still alive, but she died about 10 years ago. But this is a lady who got in trouble for sitting down. Did any of you ever ride on a bus? Anybody ever ride on any of you?
ride on the car.
You ride on the car? Nobody ever rode on the bus? Well,
My mother told me. I
okay, okay. Well, this lady lived in a time people who had skin like hers had to sit at the back of the bus. They weren't allowed to sit at the front of the bus, even if there were empty seats. They had to go all the way to the back.
That wasn't a school bus.
And one time when she rode on the bus, there were plenty of seats at the front, but no more, the seats at the back were all full. And some people who had white skin got on the bus and wanted to sit down. And the bus driver told all of those who had dark skin that they had to stand up and let the other people, the white people, sit down. Well, Rosa Parks had been doing that for her whole life, and she knew it was the law, and she knew that she was going to get in trouble if she didn't do it. But she thought, this is not right for me to have to stand up so those people can sit down. And so she didn't do it. She stayed in her seat. There's here's a picture of the man who wanted to sit down. And the bus driver came back and told her, you need to get up and move back. And she wouldn't do it. So he called the police, and the policeman came and made her get off the bus, and they took her to jail because she wanted to have a seat on the bus. But because of what Rosa Parks did, all of the people in that town then got to ride anywhere they wanted to on the bus. They didn't have to sit in the back anymore. And a lot of other good things happened because Rosa Parks decided, I will not stand up, and got in trouble for sitting down. You ever gotten in trouble for sitting down? Yeah.
Good on the bus.
Yes, they should be good on the bus.
Hey, they're kind of right. I'll be good.
You'll be good when you're on the bus.
Yeah. This all changed when Martin Luther King Jr. came in.
Well, this was at the same time that Martin Luther King Jr. was going around telling people that they needed to treat each other right. Be nice on the bus or on the floor of the church. So, okay, that's our story for today. You can go to your class if you want.
Yay, finally.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. All right. Who's gonna Okay.
I love Ty has no internal censor at all.
Everything comes out.
And I need a volunteer to read our next scripture for us out of Deuteronomy. A volunteer. I'll wait until Zach comes back in. We'll use this as an intro into his message too.
Okay.
So, although he's not preaching out of Deuteronomy. But it's about a prophet. So. I didn't tell him he was next. Sorry, I didn't tell you you were next.
Are you waiting on me?
So we're gonna read this scripture as our blessing on your offering to us.
Deuteronomy 18:15-20. Moses said to the people, the Lord your God will raise up someone from among you to be a prophet for you. The prophet will be from the same mold as me, and you are to carefully follow what such a prophet says. You yourself asked the Lord your God to do this for you. Back on the day when we gathered at Mount Sinai, you all said that you would die if you were ever again directly exposed to the sound of the Lord's voice or the glare of the Lord's fiery presence. The Lord told me you were right and said this to me. I, the Lord, will raise up someone from among their own people to be a prophet for them. This prophet will be from the same mold as you, Moses. I will put the words in the mouths of the prophet, and the prophet will tell the people everything I say they are told. Anyone who does not take any notice of what the prophet says on my behalf will have to answer to me. But by the same token, if any prophet came to represent some other source of truth or makes out what they are speaking on my behalf, when I have not told them to say anything, such a prophet must die.
Watch what you tell us.
You can take it?
Couldn't take it. She couldn't take it.
Yeah, you can take it. Yeah. So I'm going to be focusing on the Mark passage. And I guess I need to give a disclaimer. Like, you remember what the Mark passage was about? Does anyone remember?
The one I read.
Jesus was with his disciples in Capernaum in the synagogue, and something happened. There was I can't remember how it used, a corrupt spirit.
Corrupt spirit.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about, and I guess the kids are gone. But I was just wanting to make sure, like, if kids needed to be away, if I say the word demon, I don't know if that's scary.
I'm terrified.
You have to censor the Bible. It's pretty heavy. So I'm going to talk about. Well, I was going to talk about more than just the lectionary, but I don't really need to. We can focus on just that part. So this is what Ched Myers calls the introduction to the first direct action campaign. This is Jesus' assault on the Jewish social order in Capernaum. That's what he calls it. So he kind of reframes it in modern language, right? So he thinks the first 3 chapters of Mark are a direct action campaign. That's how we would say it today. And so direct action, like Rosa Parks, like Martin Luther King. It's assault on the social order in Capernaum. So what I want to do is the same thing I did last time. Is I want to look at the structure and some of the details that we aren't trained to see. Just look at the structure and some of the details, and then we can look and see what the main point might be. Because there's lots of stuff that just slips by us and we don't notice because we're not trained to read things this way. And I think the structure is still preserved in your version. Like if you look closely, I think that same structure is there. So the first direct action campaign in Capernaum is in the first 3 chapters of Mark, and this is the introduction. And the introduction has this frame to it. And last time, remember the prologue I talked about had a frame as well. You remember there's a frame, it kind of collapsed in on itself. So there were 2 great calling proclamations. The voice from Isaiah called, and then Jesus called his disciples at the beginning and end. And within that, there was reference to the wilderness, talking about journeys in the wilderness. And within that was the baptism. And so the frame tells you how to interpret the thing in the middle. The baptism is having to do with the wilderness, and it has to do with a calling. So that frame isn't just there to impress you with Mark's literary ability. It's there to communicate something. It says the thing in the middle is the most important, and these other things kind of describe that middle thing. So the baptism was given a specific meaning by being placed in that context of calling and wilderness. And its place in the center makes it the climax for the episode. So same thing happens today. The outermost part of our story today is the setting. At the beginning and the end, Mark reminds us that this is the synagogue on Sabbath. In the first part he says it's Capernaum, the last part he says it's Galilee, but at the city in Galilee. So he's reminding us of the setting and at the outer frame, at the beginning and end. And then within that, there's another frame. We're told that Jesus is teaching, and that he's teaching with unusual or new authority. So I think in the first part of it, Mark repeats the word teaching 3 times, as if we didn't get it the first 2 times. He keeps repeating it. Jesus is teaching, teaching, teaching with authority, authority, authority. And he does that within the setting. Within the teaching frame, there's a third frame. And that is where he talks about an unclean spirit causing an emotional outburst. So at first, it's the unclean spirit shouting at Jesus. And at the end, it's the people being troubled and amazed. And this word, amazed, the people were amazed at Jesus. It's not just amazed. It has more of a connotation of traumatized, like shaking in their boots amazed, like scared. So we have setting, then we have, I can't remember what it was, teaching, and then emotion. And then within that, we get to the middle. And the middle has a small frame within it too. Within that frame, there's 2 more episodes where the spirit cries out. This unclean spirit shouts, beginning and end. And then right in the middle, what is right in the middle? What do you think? Any guesses?
Jesus on a lily.
Jesus what?
Casting them out.
Yeah, casting them out, but there's something else, like right in the middle. You're right, it's right next to that. Jesus calls for silence. The exorcism, I don't know, the exorcism is this call to silence. And I think that, I mean, they're right next to each other. The call to silence and the casting out. But I think the silence is the most important thing given the context of the demon shouting really loud. And Jesus says, be quiet. And I think that be quiet is right in the middle. So silence, the command to silence stands at the very middle of this story. And it reminds us of the wilderness that we just got done reading about. What wilderness does for space, silence does for sound. Mark is asking us to look into a void, into an empty, naked space that has no ideological noise, it has no distractions. Just clear that stuff away for a second. When we set our preconceptions aside, we can then see what it means for the spirit to be silenced. And I was going to talk about the other stuff after that, but I don't need to. It's kind of a detail. But the main thing here is, what do we do with a story about demons and exorcism? Like today, how do we read that? Should we be convinced that unclean spirits or demons actually exist? Should we then hunt them down and perform exorcisms? If you read the Gospel of Mark, the answer is pretty obvious. Yes. Yes to both things. Jesus does it over and over and over and over and over. And he instructs his followers to do it. So obviously that's what we're supposed to be doing. Jesus does it. He tells us to do it. But if we look at the details of what it is he's actually doing, it's gonna change what we assumed. We're gonna have to reconsider our assumptions about what a demon and what an exorcism really is. So, yeah. Let's look at it. The first frame is the setting. In the synagogue on Sabbath day. Welcome. Was Jesus sitting in the back of the synagogue? Was he being really quiet, kind of mouthing the words? Or was he being active in the service? What do you think? In this story, was Jesus sitting in the back row, kind of minding his own business? Someone say no. I'm sorry, I don't have a rhythm today. No, of course not. He wasn't just singing the hymns quietly in the back row. The second frame within that emphasizes that Jesus was teaching. He was being loud. He was demonstrating his authority. And this happens at the beginning and the end. Throughout the whole story, this is about Jesus teaching people, demonstrating his authority. So during the service, while he's teaching with this new sort of authority, he is confronted, he's shouted down, and he's mocked. If the story hadn't told you that it was a demon, who do you think, what sort of character do you think would stand up and shout down Jesus and mock him?
A heckler, like what we saw.
A heckler, yeah. But who would be likely a heckler? Like Jesus is coming into a synagogue and he's teaching with new authority. Who would be offended by that? The people in charge, right? Whoever's in charge, whoever usually has authority, the old authority would be heckling him. And I don't think that you people are dumb, right? Like, you're right. That's exactly who was heckling him. Now, Mark names that person a demon-possessed person. But the context is pretty clear. This is in the synagogue, having to do with teaching. Obviously, who's the heckler going to be? It's going to be the same people who normally do the teaching, who are interested in maintaining a more traditional source of authority and structure. And so in this context, it would be the scribes. He's not in Jerusalem. He's out in the surrounding areas. He's in Galilee. So the scribes would be the ones kind of teaching the temple theology. So what Jesus does is he walks onto another team's home court. He grabs their microphone. He starts talking trash about them. And so, of course, what's going to happen is the home team is going to get up and they're going to fire back. That's exactly what happens in this story. And we're not wrong to see it that way. What we need to understand is what and why Mark is doing when he calls this a demon incident. The scribal representative is described as having an unclean spirit, and he shouts out, and Jesus commands him to be silent. But then the spirit shouts out again. So if this story is about Jesus having the biggest supernatural muscles, why was he unable to silence the spirit? If you read it closely, Jesus commands silence, and the demon disobeys. Like, if it's about Jesus having the biggest muscles, then this is a bad way of telling the story. It must be about something else. Why is it that this not quite effective command for silence is placed in the middle of the story? How can we understand the way that Mark places silence in the main center place? I think we can understand this passage. It kind of clicks into place if we read the story as a social confrontation, and we read the spiritual or supernatural elements as figurative of ideology. So, oh no. So I'm going to read you what I think happened. If a modern day post-Enlightenment American saw what was happening, this is how I think it would be described. A historic flesh and blood person named Jesus, very early in his career, walked into a synagogue one week and asserted his own authority. He taught differently than the scribes usually did, but he was persuasive. A member of the scribal class, or someone who was really sold on scribal authority, pushed back and interrupted Jesus. He mocked Jesus for being from a backwoods hometown. He mocked Jesus for his pretentious claim to be a prophet, the Holy One of God. But Jesus was not intimidated. He was unmoved. Jesus stood his ground and refused to be intimidated by the aura of scribal authority. And Jesus' unexpected fortitude sparked another shout from the man before he stormed out of the synagogue. Mark emphasizes twice that this is about the synagogue. He emphasizes twice that this is about teaching and that this is about authority. He emphasizes twice that this is about getting shouted down. And at the very center, he draws attention to his main point, that this is about silencing. The dominant ideology of purity and guilt is authoritatively silenced by Jesus. Jesus has no patience for it. He casts it out like a demon. In that silent moment, we imagine what life might be like without that voice in the back of our minds, telling us that we're guilty, telling us that we owe something to people in power. Mark does a really good job pulling attention away from the idea that Jesus was a superhero with superpowers. Now, he didn't deny superpowers. He doesn't deny that Jesus was the Son of God. He just pulls our attention away from anything having to do with that because he has something else to say. He does a very good job redirecting our attention toward themes of teaching, authority, and silencing instead. And it's not Mark's fault. The people like us 2,000 years later who speak a completely different language, who live on the far side of the globe, don't understand it. We don't pick up his signals. That's not his fault. He was being as clear as possible. Mark in the story shows precisely what sort of superpower Jesus possesses. This is a quote. A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits and they obey him. That's the superpower, if you need a superpower. Jesus has the ability to cut through all the ideological garbage and all the authoritative bullying. He can communicate effectively to people, even in a place that's controlled by his prime hecklers. Jesus will talk about binding a strong man later in Mark. They'll talk about binding a strong man and robbing his house. And it's already happening here in this story. Jesus is already binding the strong man and looting his house. Jesus has looted the synagogue. He has destroyed the usual authority there and claimed it for himself. That is the superpower that's on display. So again, be convinced that unclean spirits exist. Should we hunt them down and perform exorcisms? The obvious answer is yes. Jesus does it and he instructs his followers to do it as well. That doesn't mean what we have been trained to think it means though. There's no, none of the Hollywood. It's a process. This demon casting out process starts in the wilderness, where we choose a new ideology and a new loyalty. And after a long time wandering in the desert and wrestling with our demons, the goal is to come away strong enough to withstand them, even when we return back to regular life. The journey to the wilderness is absolutely not about escapism. It's a place for preparation and getting stronger so that we can return back to the city as a centered person, knowing what we stand for. Back in the city, Jesus meets the physical embodiment of the demons he wrestled in the wilderness. The scribes will be his arch enemies throughout the gospel. As we keep reading, Mark will drop more and more details exactly about why the scribes and Jesus never really got along. And I could quote to you from other parts of Mark, but Ched Myers kind of sums it up. And so I'm going to read what he wrote in Binding the Strong Man. And this is about the scribes and Jesus and what problem Jesus had with them. Although all major social groups are indicted, it is the scribes, as ideological apologists for and economic beneficiaries of the exploitative political economy, and they're singled out as the worst offenders. Mark's Jesus is unimpressed by the rhetorical affirmations of the prophetic insistence that love of neighbor is more than burnt offerings and sacrifices. That's a tangled mess of a sentence. Mark's Jesus is not impressed when the scribes say, oh, loving your neighbor is most important, and temple sacrifice isn't so important. Even though that's exactly what Jesus says. Jesus is not impressed with them when they say that. The fact is that the system itself, which the scribes uphold, reinforces class stratification of Israel. So it doesn't matter that they say the right things. They can say it's most important to love your neighbor, but they're not actually doing it. Mark, in other words, understands the nature of structural injustice, and for this reason he refuses to consider strategies of reform. The disciples do not see this clearly. At least twice they entertain the idea that Jesus' concern for the poor might be satisfied by making better use of their purchasing power in the market. Their blindness is a result of their failure to see that the system cannot be redirected towards the purposes of justice. Instead, Jesus calls for its complete collapse. And in its place, he advocates a genuine practice of equitable redistribution. I'm not going to riff on that paragraph. If you caught what he was laying down, good for you, but it's kind of revolutionary. Here in this context, the unclean spirit stands for those who usually assert authority in the synagogue, the scribes. That's the unclean spirit. The scribes further stand for a beautiful sounding, taken for granted ideology of social stratification. So the demon in this story it's not described as having any horns or hooves or any pitchfork, right? There's none of that. This demon is well-dressed, well-mannered, well-educated in the scriptures. It stands above the average people, instructing them as to what their responsibilities are. What debts do they owe? And for this service, he is compensated and made wealthy. In this room right now, I am the person who most resembles the unclean spirit. I'm behind my authoritative pulpit. I'm speaking from my authoritative holy book. I'm wearing my authoritative suit and tie. I am the one you need to watch out for people who look like me. We are the ones you need to watch out for. We are the ones that Jesus casts out like a demon. In chapter 12, Jesus will describe the scribes. He says, he gives a list of the things that scribes love. And so you can tell who they are. This is how you can tell what a scribe is, what a demon is that needs to be cast out. They love to walk around in long robes. That's the first thing. They love greetings in the marketplace. They love the first bench in the synagogue, and they love the first couch at dinners. We don't have those social institutions anymore, but you get the idea, right? If you see someone taking the first bench at the synagogue or the first couch at dinner, you can recognize what Jesus recognized. These people love social stratification. They love being smarter and more important. Our job is to remember. We remember who comes first in Jesus' community.
Amen.